Hello everyone and welcome in. My name is echohack and this is my beta feedback for Diablo 4. The goal of this feedback is to share my opinion with the development team and with you about the state of Diablo 4 in order to improve the game. I'm also a member of the Diablo 4 team on MAXROLL, and this feedback will benefit from the insights gained from talking with my fellow content creators. Collectively, we already have thousands of hours in the game together. Now, Diablo 4 is the breath of the wild of the Diablo series by turning Diablo from an instanced-only world to a truly sprawling open-world game. The large open world is ambitious, and while it offers the team an incredible opportunity to make infinite content, it will be a challenge to make each zone, dungeon, and quest feel unique. Some of the game's content does a great job offering these unique experiences, like Novesk, the Fractured Peaks stronghold with the chapel and tolling of bells, while others like Cellars don't offer much and are evenly distributed everywhere, paving over the zone with something that must be balanced to either be completely useless or always necessary. I think that if I had to change a feature like Cellars, that I would increase the size of them, but by a random amount. Currently, cellars are always these one-room dungeons, but it might be nice to have them be from one room up to 3-room mini-dungeons. It's just very, very expensive for the player to hit 2 loading screens to always do one small room of mobs. The unified SKU feel of cross-play and cross-progression has promise, but at present it makes the PC version of the game feel more like a console port, in my opinion, where PC should be the primary platform. The art, sound design, and soundtrack are S tier and completely blow away any previous Diablo game or game in the entire genre. One strange omission from the collector's box, by the way, is a fully mastered release of the soundtrack, and I hope that Blizzard is considering a real fully mastered release here. I do understand the challenges that mastering a soundtrack has over simply implementing in the game engine here, but this soundtrack might be one of Blizzard's best soundtracks yet, and it's on par with some of the work from Wrath of the Lich King soundtrack and in the Diablo 2 soundtrack. There's also some new innovations in the UI, notably how health, fortified, shield, vulnerable, etc. works, and less chrome on the game window should be applauded, especially if the information can be communicated in a unified way. The innovation around the UI for the health orb here I think is very important, as at high level play in Blizzard's games, one of the most important things that a player must do is check information in different areas of the screen. In Diablo 4, this often involves checking your health orb to ensure that you have a fortified, healthy, shield, or other state so that you can maximize your damage output. And a skilled player will need to bounce their eyes between the health orb and the action gameplay in the center of the screen. Controller support here on PC is top-notch, although strangely, keyboard-mouse is secondary in some ways. Core combat and the world darkness vibe overall feel good, with some minor problems occurring here and there. Now let's get a little bit into classes. Each class feels unique, and the game does a good job at avoiding that sameness feel between classes that Diablo 3 has become over the years. Some classes are significantly stronger than others, and balance and completeness between classes might need a look. In terms of builds, there's lots of room for expression in between builds due to the required choice system for each skill and skill cluster. This is a marked improvement over Diablo 2's required top-to-bottom skill trees, as it doesn't overwhelm the player with information, and it lets them make good choices at each step during the leveling process without necessarily needing to pull out a build guide. Still, there's always room for a best build, and certain mechanics lend themselves to a best build. Right now, it appears that the game is heavily balanced in favor of ranged classes, and the best build will always have some ranged component to them. Straight melee attacks like Rend on the Barbarian always take too much damage in melee combat. Unstoppable is also a critical mechanic to have, hopefully at all times, as it prevents unnecessary deaths from stun, freeze, and other hard crowd control mechanics. This is especially important on hardcore. The best builds will also have fast movement speed teleports, and be able to abuse this speed to blitz through the game at an insane pace. If possible, the best builds will also have an infinite resource and rely on direct damage to take advantage of critical hits and overpower mechanics. At this time, it appears that the game has several mechanics that make damage over time, particularly ground-based damage over time, like Firewall, undesirable. We already know that critical hits cannot be effective on damage over time mechanics, so that dramatically reduces the overall damage that some kind of optimized build with damage over time would be able to do. While class balance at this time is very difficult to measure, Barbarian's arsenal system notably allows them to cram 3 extra legendary powers on weapons into their character, bringing an insane number of multipliers to the table and also instantly scaling with any new meta due to the flexibility of new legendaries as the game evolves. Rogue also allows at least 1 extra multiplier on their bow or 2 times one-handed weapons, which gives them a small advantage due to the additional item slots. To me, these additional item slots just don't make a lot of sense, and I think they need to be balanced accordingly. Alright, let's get into loot. This is potentially one of the most important subjects of this video. Now, loot is awarded based on your character's level. And it appears that legendary items start dropping from the sky like candy at level 10. This is bizarre, as legendary items I think should be something that's more rare in nature than the game's current drop rate. In particular, the Purveyor of Curiosities has a very high drop rate, which puts too heavy of an emphasis on gameplay that rewards obols like events in the overworld. Now, I'm hoping that this tuning is just a triple to quadruple increase in the legendary drop rate just for the beta, such that everyone who plays the game during these very short beta weekends will have a significant opportunity to see much of the loot design in the game. Thankfully, set items are gone here, and we won't have to worry about the static set-only Diablo 3 metas anymore. One major concern here is that the design of legendary items has many raw times percent multiplicative items, and these numbers can be quite high, from 20 to 50% or even higher. From a raw mechanics point of view, it's almost always in your best interest to shove as many of these multiplicative damage modifiers into your character sheet as possible, and multiplicative 20%, 50%, or even higher percentages on this many item slots is starting to feel a little bit like Diablo 3 territory in terms of number game. I would caution the developers here to have a deep look at these numbers, and if possible, either bring them down to more sustainable levels, such as 10% to 20%, or replace them with more interesting mechanic-based legendaries. Now, some of these legendary powers with insane multipliers are aspects that you can just drop into a dungeon and get in 5 to 15 minutes if you really know where to go. One major problem that I foresee is sifting through mountains of rare items to find a perfectly rolled item. This is extremely tedious already, and there's a massive delay when hovering over the item to see the item stats. There's no loot filter to take care of this problem either, so the player's just forced to sort of like slog through mountains of worthless junk. I want to especially call attention to this because loot is perhaps the most important thing in an ARPG, and it's the core game system responsible for how the game functions, especially for that 1,000-hour player that champions the genre. To be clear, Diablo 4 is not a game that will be played for 40 hours and then never touched again. ARPG players are a different breed, and they're expecting to play the game for thousands of hours and expect a loot system that's robust enough to match that desire, even if they don't actually put thousands of hours in individually. All right, let's touch on XP range and sharing. Group XP range appears to be quite high still, and although I didn't get to scientifically test some of the same things we did back in the press preview yet, the bonuses for grouping up are still present and they're significant. Grouping with friends already comes with a heavy benefit of being able to demolish the content already and output more damage than you could solo, even with health and damage scalers in place. Reducing the range of XP and removing XP share mechanics, I believe, is important to keeping the XP gain in line with solo play wherever possible, as group play, even without these mechanics, is destined to completely leave solo play in the dust. Now, one major complaint I have is navigating the game. This is because there is a lack of a full screen overlay transparent opaque minimap. The minimap right now, it's stuck in the top right hand corner and it's very small. High level players typically navigate by the minimap because it outlines the actual navigable areas and lets you avoid dead ends, wrong ways, etc., and lets you identify quest targets and objectives more easy. Path of Exile and Diablo 2 thankfully have this feature, which lets you focus on your actual character while letting your eyes relax and view the minimap without bouncing your eyes all over the place like you're Cyril playing StarCraft 2. I would have the developers please consider adding a full screen overlay minimap option with an opaqueness slider. High-level players use this overlay minimap in different ways. Some prefer to tab the full screen minimap on and off so that they can better view the gameplay as it's happening. Others prefer to play with the map always on. Some players prefer with the full overlay map to have opaque elements so that they're easier to navigate by, while some players prefer the full overlay map to have translucent elements so it's easier to see the gameplay underneath it. All of these styles of play, by the way, are valid, and there are many examples of high-level players across the genre using all three of these examples that I just gave. All right, now we need to talk about the UI a bit and what I'm calling consolification. PC gameplay in general with keyboard, mouse doesn't have right-click menus, and instead, the gameplay is being pushed into context wheels or non-full screen pull-out tabs. Some abilities like Shadow Step require pixel accuracy on the keyboard mouse, which is more difficult while controller gets auto-targeting, which is easier in many scenarios. I think people will definitely notice this, and they'll criticize the game for lacking a PC interface. Most important out of all of these is the lack of the ability to simply right-click and invite someone to my party. I think some people still have no idea how to invite somebody they see in the world to a party, even after playing 72 hours all weekend and not sleeping. This is pretty bad. The entire point of a shared world is so that you can easily interact with other players. But the interact part here is hidden inside of a console-esque action wheel. The visuals in Diablo 4 are stunning, but we need to talk about cosmetics, in particular hair and fur. Hair, particularly long hair, and beards seem wonky and incomplete. Light hair colors seem to be more noticeable here, with some strange anti-aliasing artifacts present around these, which is especially noticeable in the character customization screen and on the login screen. Fur also seems to suffer from these same or similar anti-aliasing artifacts, and there might need to be a significant look at these to ensure that they don't clash with the game experience. One thing I do want to call out is the channeling protection feature. I want to thank the devs here for allowing us to channel, like freeing a prisoner, and not be interrupted immediately. This is especially noticeable when you have a shield, fortify, etc. up. I can't stress how important this minor quality of life feature will be for everyone. This is the Blizzard polish and the deep understanding of empathy for the player experience. More of this kind of thinking will really make Diablo 4 incredible. One thing I'm absolutely loving about Diablo 4 so far is that the team has nailed the world. The darkness in the world and the tone is completely correct. The soundtrack and the sound design are a big part of this. In my mind, Diablo 4 is distinctly not Diablo 2 or Diablo 3 inspired. It's Diablo 1 inspired. The soundtrack really reflects that, but also the small touches like the Butcher showing up 1 out of 50 times or so in dungeons just really make the vibe feel Diablo 1. The game's graphics at resolutions of 1440p and higher also look crisp and incredible. If you're watching this video, by the way, make sure you go down to the quality and kick it up to 4K, because I've gone to a lot of trouble to record game footage in nearly flawless 4K quality. It's a major milestone for the channel here, and I'm really proud of it. That said, something really strange happens when the game is at lower resolutions, like 1080p or lower, and the game starts to look rather muddy, at least to me. I think a lot of this doesn't have much to do with the technical capabilities of Diablo 4, but rather the art design and the direction. The game really is optimized here for a highly dynamic lighting system with different materials and high resolution textures. All that said, if you can, please play Diablo 4 at 4K at 60 FPS or higher, and I guarantee you that it will look amazing. Now, one of the things I think a game can do to be truly great is to lean into its strengths. Diablo 4's main strength right now is obviously the tone, lighting, and sound design and soundtrack of the game. I wonder if the developers have considered playtesting the game in a horror-like environment. Like a somewhat noise-isolated room with all the lights off except some maybe very low red mood lights and headphones only, or perhaps maybe even to go so far to play the game in a haunted place. I think this kind of playtest could actually really help the team evaluate and improve the world feel of the game and identify anything that really feels out of place for a Diablo-style dark fantasy world. The world and tone of the game is, in my opinion, fantastic, especially moments that drip with great sound design. One thing that Diablo games such as Diablo 2 do so well is the item sound design. I'm not sure I got that same impression here from picking and up and dropping off each item type, and some more sound work to really make each item have a certain weight and feel to it could provide a lot of clarity to the player while also continuing that same iconic Diablo feel. All right, let's talk a little bit about daily quests or hidden caps. The beta thankfully has no daily quests, weekly quests, or as far as I can tell, hidden caps that gate player content and progression. The only exception here is the world boss. This is a breath of fresh air compared to Lost Ark or similar games, and I think that the team should stay vigilant in keeping these artificial daily active user or monthly active user levers out of the experience entirely. Now, right now, the world boss appears to be this only example of a limited time event, and the ability to make this special while also only giving the rewards one time, I think is a decent place for a feature like this to be in. All right, let's talk about the inventory and specifically the inventory's UI, because there's some major problems here. Horizontally scaling tabs and tab sheets don't belong in the inventory. Full stop. This is the stash's job. It's okay if the development team wants to make some high quality, cool looking, pre-sorted tabs for the stash if needed. Path of Exile has more than paved the way here in making useful, pre-sorted tabs for the stash that are beautiful. This is something I feel pretty strongly about. The inventory should not double as a stash of sorts and have navigable tab sheets. This really confuses the UI for the player, by the way. Any consumables such as elixirs should just be made into core features instead of being on sort of a separate tab that's hidden away. Which, by the way, elixirs giving percentage-based XP gain is something that I would advise removing, as this could lead to players needing to farm certain components for increased XP gain, and I think that whole system is a good problem just to avoid entirely. Quest items are an implementation detail, and frankly, the player shouldn't have to worry about having a tab to look at these items anyway. As far as I'm concerned, in the last 200 hours, I never once had to use a quest item during either of these betas, and this tab in my inventory screen was just completely useless. If necessary, you can break the stash out for specialized uses. Perhaps the occultist here gets an aspect vault next to her that you can access when you're swapping around your legendary aspects. Path of Exile uses this same approach, and it's so effective that it keeps even PoE's mind-boggling amount of nonsense somewhat manageable for us mere mortals. All right, let's touch on obols and gambling. I feel like gambling with obols at the Purveyor of Curiosities should be a dark interaction. You could probably tell a lot of story here with the voice lines that the character here gives. This point of contact definitely should be a Geed or Kadala kind of character. Shady, dark, and probably contributing to society's ills. Geed and Kadala are important Diablo characters to many people, and people still talk about them to this day. Where is their successor? In fact, the lack of identity for this character is so noticeable that people have simply begun calling them Kadala. Diablo 4 is better than this, and it has better character design than this. Now, I didn't feel that this particular character in Diablo 4 is correct in the game yet, and this NPC just felt like some random, easily forgotten character instead. All right, now we need to talk about side quests because they have some major problems. Side quests are boring, frustrating, and they're just not rewarding. Renown grinding at the beginning of a season is looking like a huge boring chore if that's what we actually have to do. This is in contrast to the main quest in Act 1, which is finely polished and overall is a pretty good questline. Now, one thing here is that there's a huge delay between different segments of side quests. Typically, you'll have to follow some NPC from point A to point B, and you have to talk to them or click something multiple times just to keep going. Babysitting NPCs like this is not really fun at all, and it feels like it's wasting my time. Now, one really problematic part of side quests is the lack of side quest multi-track or multi-progress. There's no good way to really effectively overlap and track multiple side quests. Because most of them are follow the NPC or find the needle in the haystack, there's almost none of the collect 10 bear pelts, kill 20 bears style of quests, and you're stuck just plodding from point to point on a monorail that goes around the zone in a circle. Now, there are some good side quests, and the few side quests that I did enjoy are typically very punchy. Hey, I'm an NPC, and I need you to go to this dungeon to kill the 30 bad dudes. Here's a blue diamond on the dungeon, and I'm gonna follow you at your own character speed. I'm gonna shut up now, and I'm gonna let you blow up the bad guys. Talk to me when you're done to finish the quest. These style quests felt good because they add something to the dungeon that you normally wouldn't have, and they give you an additional reason to go there. There's only a few of these available in the game, but when I did run across them, they gave me more of a sense of purpose instead of backtracking all over the world to deliver some widget to some unimportant NPC. Whew, all right, let's get into dungeons. I think besides loot, this might be the roughest part of the game at present. Now, when I opened this video, I compared Diablo 4 to Breath of the Wild, and that's true here too. Breath of the Wild's overworld is fantastically designed, but the dungeons are the same bland mechanics over and over and over again. Diablo in general is very much known for its procedurally generated dungeons and replayability, but presently in the beta, we're presented with many different dungeons which only have a few tile sets and the same objectives over and over. Some of these objectives are well designed, and in this section I want to give credit to those. Some of them, on the other hand, are terrible reconstructions of bad design, pulled straight out of things that even Diablo 2 purists hate, like the Den of Evil. One major problem I can see here is a meta developing around a particular dungeon and doing that particular dungeon over and over and over again because that dungeon has certain optimal objectives, mob types, and layouts, which makes the game extremely stale, extremely fast. Now, why are there so few dungeon objectives? First, we have Destroy the Widget. This objective is pretty odd. You gotta blow up a statue, and then afterwards, a difficult elite mob spawns, after which you usually skip this mob entirely to speed up your completion of the dungeon. You can leave this room before the elite mob even spawns in. Now, I don't really understand this objective design. It seems boring to run around and punch 3 statues before finishing the dungeon. Shouldn't the elite also spawn before you start punching the statue? I don't know, it just feels really weird to me. The next one we have is slay all enemies in the dungeon. I thought we left the Den of Evil behind in Diablo 2. This design is bad, full stop. Nobody wants to hunt for that last fallen that got left behind half a dungeon ago. The red dots on the minimap are immersion breaking, but they're also required because this objective sucks. This should be kill 80% of the enemies instead. A good way to frame this objective instead of slay all enemies is to cull the enemies, such that you're not worried about killing 100.0% of all of the enemies, but you will need to kill a significant amount, perhaps more than you're used to if you normally just speed through a dungeon. Slay the elite mob. Now, this is a really interesting objective, and I think if it's carefully balanced, I don't see a problem with animus carriers or other objectives similar to it that require killing an elite. Elite hunting is a key part of Diablo 2 and Diablo 3's objective design, and I think overall, this has a really good place in the game's design and that it should be used. Now let's talk about free the prisoners. Some dungeons have 5, 6, or even 7 prisoners. Is this intentional? Is the goal to make better and worse dungeons, or is this a bug? I feel like the quality of life to not get interrupted on first hit when channeling this objective makes this objective actually usable, but a little bit more spice, something like perhaps a cursed prisoner that turns into an elite mob 1 out of 50 times would make things a little bit more interesting. Let's get into Return the Widget. This seems like a decent objective because there's a cast time that's not too long to pick the item up and carry it. Now, what's cool is that from a meta perspective, multiple players could split farm these objectives quite nicely. I think it's a good design, and I'm not sure I'd change much here. High level players could also even crowd control the monsters in a room holding the objective, pick up the orb, complete the objective, and speed through without killing much if they really wanted to optimize for speed. Now, these are all the objectives that I've been able to identify so far. Maybe there's one or two that I might have missed, hopefully not. All right, let's talk about the other tricky topic here, loot and itemization. The loot system, that is rares, legendaries, and uniques, so far works. But considering that the beta is only levels 1 to 25, it's really tough to tell how this scales at this time. I think one major obvious concern here is the high damage multipliers on many items, and it's quite possible that later in the game it turns into a Tetris equation of how to get as many multipliers into your build as possible instead of making more mechanic-based style choices. I'd like to see some multipliers reduced across the board here, somewhere to the 10% to 30% range. I think players are rightfully concerned here about the potential for a power creep future where we see millions, billions, or even more damage on the screen, and this should be very carefully managed. The two-handed weapon meta right now is actually pretty interesting. Two-handed weapons are significantly better than their one-handed counterparts due to how legendary item multipliers work. I'm actually okay with this for now. It's the first time I can remember in sort of any ARPG that two-handed weapons are best in slot. At some point, a meta shakeup would be nice here though, and this system might need a look. This is particularly impactful for Barbarian's arsenal system and Rogue's extra weapon slot. Now, why is the legendary drop rate so insane? This is the question I'm sort of asking myself. I think these drop rates, as present in the beta, should be reduced, especially because aspects are available to finish out builds early on from dungeon completion alone. Overall, I hope these drop rates is just sort of a beta thing, but the fact that it's not explicitly called out in the beta as well as some kind of beta buff is also kind of odd. One other minor point here on itemization is that gems are fairly useless. Once you max out your gems here, I just sort of stop picking them up. Maybe this is fine and sockets are just meant to boost your character a little bit. It kind of feels weird though to have nothing to do with these. Perhaps there's something later in the game that we're missing now, but it just seems weird that these drop and essentially have no value. Let's get into Altars of Lilith, because this is sort of a new open worldy, gotta catch 'em all kind of mechanic. So I'm going around now and I'm discovering all the Altars of Lilith in the game. One thing I'd like to see changed is that the discovered state of the altars should be the same across all of your characters. This way you can work across multiple characters to discover all of the altars. In other words, when you make a new character currently, none of your already discovered altars are on your minimap at all. So there's no way to really get a good understanding of which ones you've already discovered on an account-wide basis. If you discover a new one on a different character, the state of that isn't persisted over to your other characters right now, even though new characters only get the renown benefits and not the account-wide stats. All right, hey, you made it to the end of the video. This is definitely a long one, but believe it or not, is not even all the thoughts and ideas that I've had for feedback. This is my heavily edited version, so it's more digestible in a YouTube format. Since you did make it this far, please consider subscribing below, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.